Are HP scaling units the future of Wuthering Waves' meta? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So up until this point, WuWa's mostly been featuring attack scalers. The only HP scaling DPS that we've gotten up until this point has been Kardathea, who was quite a recent release. And that's actually what's got me thinking. We don't really have that many uniquely scaling damage dealers. We only really have two. Mr. Brant Wuthering Waves himself, and Kardathea. Now granted, Brant doesn't scale off of HP, he scales off of energy recharge, and he's more of a second slot teammate, not really a main DPS. Granted, Lupa's recent release did indeed help out his main DPS teams by quite a bit, and you're able to play him as one more effectively these days. But either way, both him and Kardathea are capable of dealing damage, and both of them are uniquely scaling units. But I mostly want to focus on HP percent here, because I personally think it would be the next logical direction that they would take in terms of unit scalings. Now granted, Kuro doesn't really have any particular reason to go in this direction. They don't really have to change from making mostly attack scalers, because honestly, all that really does is limit gear, because they're going to make new gear, it's going to be for HP characters specifically, and that basically locks off that gear from being good for the entire rest of the roster. And I do understand that we indeed have other HP scaling units of course, but those are mostly healers, and I'm trying to talk about damage dealers in particular here. However, it should be noted that usually whenever you make a character HP scaling, you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. More often than not, you're gonna tie some sort of special mechanic to it. Now this unit is an attack scaler, but I'm gonna bring her up because she's a pretty good example. Donjin. Now like I said, she doesn't scale on HP. However, she does have a mechanic in her kit which would commonly be seen on an HP scaler. HP drain. It's pretty self-explanatory why this is a very popular mechanic to slap onto HP scalers. After all, they drain their own HP, which makes it harder for them to survive. But if they inherently already scale on that, then if they drain themselves to about half of their HP, then they basically have just as much as any other character who would scale on attack. Or if they need to consume a whole lot of it in order to do most of their damage or buff themselves up or whatever it may be, then they're able to consume as much of that as possible. Now granted, it is very possible for them to simply make an HP scaling character just because. However, if you actually look at Kardathea, she has some HP draining gain in her kit. This is what I'm talking about, it's a very, very common mechanic. So obviously the scaling on its own doesn't mean much, because it's literally just locking off gear for the sake of doing it. But whenever you actually look into the mechanics that you can put in around HP scaling, that's when things start to get interesting, because it opens up a whole new door in terms of playstyles. Now of course we have to ask, was Kardathea a successful HP scaler? Well here's the thing, because basically every other DPS up until this point has scaled on particularly attack, even Brant who enjoys his energy recharge does benefit from attack buffs, there's not really any particular HP buffer if you will that can work with her. Her main central damage focus is around negative statuses and arrow erosion. I mean, if you take a look at Shikona, she doesn't really have anything to do with HP buffing, she's very particularly focused on negative statuses. And the issue of gear disparity was more clear than ever when it came to looking at Kardathea's signature. Her sig is so much better than basically every other option, simply by virtue of it being an offensive HP percent scaling sword. And it provided her a lot of good stats. It wasn't just a little bit, like it's a really good signature weapon for her, and until we get more offensive swords that are HP scaling, it's gonna stay this way. As for the actual HP scaling part of her kit, it's mostly to do with her ult transformation. Whenever she turns into Fleur-de-Lis, she consumes 50% of her HP, and then whenever you use her insane finisher move, she restores 50%. Other than that, there's not really anything else to do with HP in her kit. So I would say that Kuro was indeed quite tame here, but it wasn't really the main focus of her kit anyway. But it does go to show that whenever you include some unique type of scaling on a character, you're able to do some unique things with them. Granted, this sort of HP consumption mechanic really is nothing special, it's not some crazy mechanic that has never been done before, but there's indeed still interesting ways that you can interpret it and make supports to build around it. I mean shoot, what if they end up making more specialized third slot teammates that are made specifically for HP scalers, that can tend to this sort of HP loss playstyle? And that's another interesting thing. If they were to focus specifically on the mechanic of losing and gaining HP, we can actually see how Donjin's meta value would change over time. She's obviously very good as it currently stands, but I'm actually curious would she fluctuate and go up if they were to go in that direction, or would she not really benefit much because, well, she's attack scaling? But I'm more so talking about a support that would specifically focus on the fluctuation of HP rather than the actual scaling itself. Think about how Shikona, for Kardathea, doesn't really focus on her scaling, but does focus on her erosion-based qualities. Wuthering Waves has put out these quite specialized supports before, it's nothing new. But I think what's more interesting, as opposed to the basic loss and gain mechanics, would be some more interesting ways to interpret it. I do trust that Kuro would be able to come up with some funky ideas as to how they can make the scaling more interesting. And the more uniquely scaling characters we get in the game, the less niche that gear for them becomes, because then Kuro would eventually go and put some in events, or put some more echo sets out, or just generally put out more gear that would help these characters have a wider array of options to a wider array of people. Because as it currently stands, both Brant and Cardathia are some of the most unfriendly characters in the game to equip, because both of them are asking for such a specific type of weapon that most people just aren't going to have on hand. Like with Brant, his signature weapon provides him both offensive stats and the energy recharge he wants. Nothing else is offering him that. And with Cardathia, you're pretty much just going to be coping with other 5-star crit sticks if you're unable to get her signature weapon. Now granted, it doesn't even just have to stop at HP. They could do very unique stuff with energy recharge. Like for example, I will say I really like one particular thing about Brant's playstyle. He basically always has his ult up. Usually, I hate using the ults of characters in the overworld, because goodness me, it just takes a while to get it back, and I just hate using characters that really need their ult in order to do the main portion of their damage output in the overworld, because then it just feels like they're constantly basic attacking and doing basically nothing against the overworld enemies. I'm looking at you, Zani. Playing Zani in overworld is just playing Confession Phoebe in overworld. But with Brant, you use his ult and he basically has it back again instantly. It's very, very comfortable to use against any encounter, because he takes no time to recharge it. So I can definitely imagine there being a team of characters that just constantly are casting their Resonance Liberation, and it will be super, super fun to see that. Or even just to see how Kuro Games would be able to handle some unique types of energy manipulation. It's an interesting way that they could take the combat, and it's not really a playstyle that we've really seen in the game so far, except for Brent, who in my opinion, outside of his interruption issues, which are indeed very annoying, he is very, very fun to play. I think he's got to be one of the most fun units to play in the game right now. Perhaps I'm just out of ideas, but I can't really think of what they would do with death scaling. Usually that type of thing is just associated with more tanky playstyles. I feel like that's probably the direction that they would go in, because, well, whenever you think of defense and death, you're gonna think of, well, defensiveness. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I don't really think that Kuro's gonna touch back for quite some time. I think it's more logical to focus on things like HP and energy recharge and that type of thing. Stats that we're already a bit more familiar with. We don't have a single character in this game, correct me if I'm wrong, that can utilize defense percent. Basically any tanky healer character or defensive character wants to build HP. And I do think that this would end up creating for some interesting variety. And I can see some people being a little bit worried that this would make old supports obsolete, but to that I'd say, just look at Cardathia actually. Shorekeeper is still a very good unit for her teams if you're free to play and you don't have a copy of Shikona. You're likely going to be using somebody like Santwa or Changli in the middle, so for your third slot, you're actually ideally going to want to use Shorekeeper because her crit buffs are excellent. Crit is universal. We don't actually have a playstyle in the game yet that's not crit based. So despite Cardathia being the first HP scaling DPS, she's still able to utilize what is widely considered to be the absolute best character in the game right now that works for basically every team. And she's still able to utilize generalist buffs such as heavy percent and basic percent, and not to mention things like damage amp. So this wouldn't suddenly mean that all old characters would end up being obsolete. Now granted, they could find some way to make it really restrictive like negative statuses, which would just be disappointing, I'm gonna say that flat out. I really hope that if they ever did go and experiment with new playstyles, they would do so in a way where basically anybody would be able to try it. I would suggest that they could try it out with 4 stars, just to test the waters, but let's be realistic, if they make a new 4-star, it's probably going to suck. Which is a shame. I do really think that some good new 4-stars would really help out with balancing, especially considering how restrictive negative statuses are. I do think some 4-stars revolving around that would really help, especially an erosion negative status 4-star. But we basically haven't gotten a genuinely good 4-star since the game came out. Hopefully that changes sometime soon, but I'm not really counting on it. Regardless, even if it's an unrealistic suggestion, I'll throw it out there anyway. I do think that if they just wanted to try this out, they could try it with a 4-star. Granted, that character would probably suck because they wouldn't have any signature gear made for them, so if it were up to me, I would personally make them a sword user so that they could at least use Cardathia's weapon, but it would at least be a way for Kuro Games to try and experiment and kinda see how it goes. With all this being said, I don't think they're gonna be finished with attack scalers anytime soon. I personally think that what Kuro Games is trying to do is slowly trickle in more and more HP or energy or whatever scalers over time, so that we eventually build up a larger roster of them. I don't necessarily expect us to get a big wave of only HP scalers, only energy scalers, unless they're trying to shill a very dedicated type of duo or synergy or trio even. I think if that were to happen, it would probably be at the start of the next big patch cycle. We know that Wuthering Waves has big patch cycles once every 6 months, so that means the next time that I would personally expect it to happen would be in 3.0. Definitely let me know about what you think down below. Do you feel like that more scalings would end up just being kind of redundant, or do you agree that there would actually be some unique things that they could do in terms of playstyle and game mechanics? Certainly let me know down below. As always, I have a second channel where I just post literally whatever at this point. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in that. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I personally think that HP scalers and other scalers of unique types may end up being a very interesting future for Wuthering Waves' meta. This has been Juice, signing out. And if I'm being completely honest, Fleur-de-Lis's real scaling is pure, cold, hard aura.